Jason had never imagined that a simple diplomatic mission could lead to such a strange encounter. He was part of a human delegation sent to meet the Zarnian species, an alien race known for their advanced technology and strong traditions. Their home planet was a place of quiet beauty, filled with towering cities and lush green landscapes. Yet, amidst all this sophistication, the humans were still a bit of an oddity to the Zarnian people. It was his first time on Zarnia, and Jason wasn't exactly sure what to expect. He had learned the basics of their language and customs, but nothing could truly prepare him for meeting an alien face to face. The Zarnian woman standing in front of him now was one of the highest-ranking officials in their government. Her name was Era. Jason noticed how tall and elegant she was, her pale blue skin shimmering under the soft sunlight that filtered through the grand windows of the meeting room. Era's long, flowing hair was a silvery color that complemented her alien features. Her eyes, though, were the most striking, deep and almost glowing with wisdom. She was dressed in a sleek, form-fitting outfit of deep teal, her attire unlike anything Jason had ever seen before. It was obvious that she was important. She radiated authority. "Welcome to Zarnia, Ambassador Jason," Era said in a calm, smooth voice, her words carrying a formal yet inviting tone. Jason nodded, doing his best to remain professional despite the nerves that tingled in his chest. "Thank you for having me, Era. I'm honored to be here." There was a pause as they exchanged polite greetings. Jason could feel the weight of the room's silence pressing on him. The alien woman seemed so composed, so dignified. He, on the other hand, was still trying to navigate this complex world of interspecies diplomacy. As the conversation continued, Jason found himself getting a little more relaxed. Era was intelligent and articulate, and he appreciated the opportunity to learn more about Zarnia's culture. However, the pressure of impressing her was still there, lingering in the back of his mind. At one point, Jason found his eyes lingering on Era's face, noting how her beauty wasn't the same as what he was used to. It wasn't the soft beauty he'd seen in human women, but something unique, something otherworldly. She wasn't just beautiful in an aesthetic way. There was a quiet power to her presence. She seemed untouchable, like something not meant to be within reach. Without thinking, Jason blurted out, "You look beautiful today." The words slipped from his mouth before he could stop them. He realized immediately that they might not have been the best choice. Was it appropriate to compliment an alien woman you barely knew? Was this considered rude in her culture? He couldn't tell, and the silence that followed made him regret speaking. Era's expression changed. For a moment, her perfectly composed face was overtaken by a look of surprise, and then confusion. Her large eyes blinked slowly, and she stared at him for a few long seconds. Jason immediately regretted his words. He had no idea what was going on in Era's mind, but he sensed that he had done something wrong. Had he crossed a line? It was clear that this compliment hadn't landed the way he expected. Era didn't smile or thank him. She just seemed unsettled. Jason awkwardly shifted his weight, unsure of how to move forward. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." But Era held up a hand, signaling him to stop. Her voice was soft, almost as if she were trying to make sense of something herself. "Your words are unexpected," she said quietly. "Humans often speak with such openness." She paused. "But thank you." Jason stood there, unsure of what to say next. What had he done wrong? This wasn't how he imagined their first conversation going. The moments after Jason's compliment felt like hours. He could tell that Era was struggling with something, her expression shifting from confusion to something deeper, perhaps even contemplation. It was as if his words had unlocked a door to a world she wasn't ready to explore. Jason tried to steady himself, hoping the awkward silence would pass quickly. He had only meant to be polite, to show kindness in a strange new world, but now he couldn't shake the feeling that he had somehow offended her. What had he done wrong? Era took a deep breath and glanced out the large window of the meeting room. The landscape of Zarnia stretched out beneath the twin suns, casting a soft glow on the greenery below. It was peaceful, and yet Jason could feel a storm brewing in the air between them. Finally, Era spoke again, her voice quiet but firm. "Your words, they are not what I am used to hearing," she said, still looking out the window. "In Zarnia, compliments are not given lightly. They hold weight. They mean something more." Jason's curiosity piqued. He had to know more. "I didn't mean to offend you. I thought you looked wonderful. I didn't know how else to say it." He shrugged, hoping his sincerity would help. Era turned to face him, her gaze intense but not unfriendly. "In my culture," she began slowly, "beauty is not something that is spoken of so freely. It is seen as a deeply personal matter. A compliment like yours would be reserved for someone you have known well, someone with whom you have formed a bond. It is not something to be given casually." She paused, her eyes searching his face. "It is not something you give to an acquaintance." Jason felt a wave of embarrassment flood over him. He hadn't realized how different their cultures were, how much he had misunderstood her way of life. His own world had always been one where compliments were exchanged easily, where kind words were used to break the ice and make connections. But for Era, it seemed to be a completely different story. "I see," Jason muttered, trying to make sense of her words. "I had no idea. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make things uncomfortable." Era softened a little at his apology, but there was still an air of tension around her. "You didn't offend me," she said, her voice still calm, but now tinged with something else. "Was it curiosity? But you have made me think. In your world, such words seem to come easily, as if they hold no weight. But here, we do not speak of beauty like that. We hold it in high regard." Jason nodded, feeling like he was learning something important about Era and her culture. "I understand. I guess I need to learn more about your customs, your people," he said, a bit sheepishly. Era regarded him for a moment longer before nodding. "Yes. Perhaps it would be wise to understand our ways before you speak freely again." There was no harshness in her words, just an honest observation. "But I do not find your sincerity unwelcome. Perhaps there is more for me to learn about you and your ways as well." The conversation had taken a strange turn, but Jason felt a sense of relief. Era hadn't rejected him, not completely. She was just different, and he needed to respect that. He could tell that she wasn't angry, but something had shifted between them, an unspoken understanding that they were both learning from each other, trying to navigate a new, unfamiliar space. As they continued their conversation, Jason felt a growing sense of respect for Era and her culture. He knew he had much to learn, but he was determined to understand her world better. He had just hoped his next words would come out with more thought. Over the next few days, Jason and Era continued their work on the diplomatic mission, but there was an unspoken understanding between them now. The tension from their first conversation had faded, replaced by a quiet curiosity on both sides. Jason was eager to learn more about Era's culture, while she was beginning to open up to him in ways that she hadn't before. It was the evening after their last meeting when Era invited Jason to join her for a tour of the city. "Perhaps this will help you understand more about our ways," she suggested. Jason agreed, grateful for the chance to learn from her firsthand. As they walked through the vibrant streets of Zarnia's capital, Era began to explain the deeper meanings behind many of the customs and traditions Jason had witnessed. The architecture of the city was stunning. Tall, elegant spires that reached for the sky, surrounded by lush parks and tranquil water features. But it was the cultural aspects of the city that Era was eager to share with Jason. "In Zarnia, we value strength and wisdom above all," Era explained as they walked through a wide, tree-lined avenue. "Beauty is not something we speak of easily because it is tied to these qualities. One does not simply look beautiful. To be beautiful in our eyes, one must possess the strength to lead and the wisdom to guide others." Jason listened intently, fascinated by the way Era described her world. He had never thought about beauty in such a deep, philosophical way. To him, Beauty had always been something simple, a compliment given to someone for their appearance. But Era's explanation made him realize that in her culture, it was so much more than that. "And what about you?" Jason asked, suddenly curious. "Do you see yourself as beautiful?" Era looked at him for a moment, her eyes softening as if considering the question. "I suppose I do," she replied, but her tone was thoughtful, not boastful. "But not because of how I look. It is my experiences, my leadership, my mind that shape who I am. Beauty, as you call it, is the result of those things." Jason felt a spark of understanding. "So, beauty isn't just skin deep for you," he said, nodding slowly. "It's about who you are inside." Era smiled slightly, her features softening. "Yes, exactly. But in your world, I see it as different. Beauty is often about appearance, and that is why your compliment took me by surprise. In Zarnia, we speak of strength, wisdom, and honor, but rarely of beauty." The more Jason heard, the more he realized how much he had misunderstood. He had assumed that Era, as an alien, would have similar views to humans on beauty and compliments. But now he understood that her society placed a much greater emphasis on inner qualities and achievements. "I see now," Jason said, smiling at Era. "It's like, in my world, we might call someone beautiful to show appreciation. But I guess for you, that's just the beginning. It's about what they've done, what they've accomplished." "Yes," Era agreed. "That is why your words, while kind, seemed strange. But I am beginning to understand. Perhaps beauty is not so simple after all." As they continued their walk through the city, Jason couldn't help but feel grateful for the insight Era was sharing. The more he learned, the more he realized that understanding someone else's culture wasn't just about words. It was about listening, respecting, and opening oneself to new ideas. By the time they returned to the embassy, Jason felt like he had gained more than just knowledge about Zarnia. He had gained a new perspective on what it meant to appreciate someone, not just for their appearance, but for who they were deep down. The lesson wasn't just about Era's culture, it was about him too. Jason had always known that people were more than what they seemed on the surface, but now, in a foreign world, he was beginning to understand it in a way he never had before. Jason thought he had begun to understand Era. Her culture was different from his own, but they were making progress. They continued to meet for discussions, slowly building a connection through their conversations about leadership, strength, and the deeper meanings of beauty. Jason's earlier awkwardness had faded into genuine curiosity and respect. Era, too, seemed to be warming up to him. Her words were no longer as guarded, and her once distant demeanor had softened. But despite their growing friendship, there was an undercurrent of tension that Jason couldn't quite place. It was during one of their later meetings that the tension finally broke. They were sitting in a quiet room, filled with holographic maps of their respective planets. Jason had just finished explaining some human cultural practices, trying to explain how his people valued individuality and personal freedom. Era listened closely, her sharp eyes focused on him. Her posture was as composed as ever, but there was something else in her gaze, a hint of uncertainty. "So," Jason said, breaking the silence, "I guess we both have different ways of looking at things. But that doesn't mean we can't understand each other better, right?" Era's response wasn't immediate. She looked at him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she leaned back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest. "Perhaps," she said, her voice cool, "but there is something you still do not understand about us." Jason raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "You have said many things to me," Era continued, her voice calm but firm, "but there is one thing you still do not grasp." She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Your words of compliment, your compliments to me. They are too easy." Jason frowned, unsure of what she meant. "What do you mean by that?" "I thought I was being respectful." "You do not understand," Era said, her voice now carrying a sharp edge. "You do not understand the weight of your words. A compliment like the one you gave me, It is not just a gesture. It is not something to be said lightly. In Zarnia, words are not given freely, especially not to someone you do not truly know. Jason was taken aback. But I thought. He stopped himself, unsure of how to proceed. Era stood up suddenly, her movements quick and precise. You cannot just give compliments as you would to a friend. In Zarnia, beauty is something earned. It is something that comes through actions, through strength, and through wisdom. Her voice was tense now, and Jason could tell that something deeper was bothering her. I didn't mean to disrespect you, Jason said, standing up as well, his tone pleading. I thought I was just showing kindness. I didn't know how much weight my words carried. Era's gaze softened for a brief moment, but then her expression hardened again. That is the problem, she said quietly, almost to herself. You do not understand. Jason felt the weight of her words. His heart sank. He had never intended to hurt Era, but it seemed that his attempts to be kind had only made things worse. He wanted to reach out to her, to explain himself, but he knew that he was treading on unfamiliar ground. The cultural divide between them was more than just language. It was a matter of values and beliefs, and Jason wasn't sure how to bridge that gap. I'm sorry, Era, Jason said, his voice quiet. I want to understand. I want to respect your culture. Era sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. I know you do, Jason, but understanding takes time. It takes more than just words. And sometimes, she trailed off, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. Sometimes, I wonder if you will ever truly understand. The room fell silent once again, and Jason could feel the distance between them growing wider. This was the breaking point. They had reached the edge of their connection, and Jason didn't know if they could come back from it. The days after their heated conversation were quiet, almost painfully so. Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between him and Era. They still met for their diplomatic discussions, but the warmth that had once been there seemed to have faded. Era, though still polite, was distant. Her answers were more formal, her gaze more guarded. Jason couldn't help but feel as though he had lost something important, something he wasn't sure how to get back. He spent long hours reflecting on what had happened. Era's words echoed in his mind. You do not understand. It was true. He hadn't understood the weight of his compliments. He had only seen them as friendly gestures, but for Era, they carried more meaning than he had realized. He was beginning to see how deeply ingrained her culture was in everything she did, how every word and action held significance. Jason had always prided himself on being open-minded, willing to learn from others. But this had been different. He had unintentionally stepped into a world he wasn't prepared for, and now he had to figure out how to make things right. One evening, after another quiet dinner with Era, Jason decided to confront the situation. He could feel the distance between them growing with each passing day, and he couldn't bear it any longer. He needed to understand her, to truly understand her culture and her values. But more than that, he needed to show Era that he respected her, not just as a diplomat, but as a person. Era, Jason began softly as they sat in the meeting room, the same place where their conversation had gone wrong. She looked up at him, her eyes guarded but not unkind. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about the compliments. I realize now that I didn't fully understand what they meant to you. Era remained silent, her gaze steady. She didn't interrupt, but Jason could see a flicker of something in her eyes, perhaps a hint of relief that he was acknowledging the situation. I'm sorry, Jason continued, his voice sincere. I didn't mean to disrespect your culture or make you feel uncomfortable. I thought I was being kind, but I see now that my words weren't the right way to express what I feel. Era's expression softened, just a little. You did not disrespect me, Jason, but you did not understand. In Zarnia, beauty is something earned, something that speaks to who you are. It is not something that can be given or received casually. It is not simply about appearance. Jason nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. I get it now. Beauty isn't just about how someone looks. It's about their actions, their strength, and their wisdom. It's about everything they are. Era's eyes flickered with something, perhaps approval, perhaps a little more understanding. She leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but firm. Yes, it is not something to be given away freely. It is something that is earned through deeds and choices. Jason sat quietly for a moment, reflecting on how different their worlds were, what he had taken for granted in his own life. Compliments, kindness, had a very different meaning for Era and her people. It wasn't just about words. It was about understanding the depth of someone's character, the effort they put into their actions, and the legacy they left behind. "I've been trying to understand you," Jason said, his voice softer now. "But I'd also realized something else. It's not just about learning your culture. It's about respecting it, even when I don't fully understand it." Era looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter than usual. "Respect, Jason, is the foundation of everything. And I can see now that you are trying. That is more than enough." Jason smiled slightly, the tension between them easing for the first time in days. It wasn't going to be easy, he knew that. There were still many things he didn't understand about Era's world. But for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. He hadn't just learned about her culture. He had learned about the importance of patience, of listening, and of truly respecting someone's beliefs. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something deeper. A connection that went beyond words, beyond compliments, something built on understanding and trust. The next few days passed with a quiet, comfortable tension between Jason and Era. While things weren't completely back to normal, Jason could tell that there had been a shift. Era seemed to have softened just a little, her usual cool demeanor now accompanied by moments of genuine conversation. They still weren't the closest of friends, but there was a sense of mutual respect that hadn't been there before. Jason spent his time reflecting on their talks, trying to understand Era's world more deeply. He kept thinking about how easy it was for him to make a simple mistake, how the words he thought were harmless could carry so much weight in another culture. It made him more aware of the things he said and did, especially when it came to Era. He wasn't just learning about diplomacy now. He was learning about human connection, about respecting others' boundaries, and about truly listening. It was the evening when Jason decided that he had to do more than just reflect on what happened. He needed to take responsibility for his actions, to show Era that he was sincere in his desire to understand her. He wasn't sure how she would react, but he knew that if they were going to move forward, he needed to apologize properly. The setting sun cast a soft glow across the room as Jason walked into the small garden where Era often spent her evenings. She was standing by a fountain, her long silvery hair flowing in the breeze. The peaceful atmosphere of the garden made it feel like a good place to have an honest conversation. "Era," Jason began softly, his voice carrying a slight hint of hesitation. She turned, her deep eyes meeting his with an unreadable expression. She had always been hard to read, but tonight there was a softness to her gaze that gave him hope. "I've been thinking about everything," Jason continued, walking closer. "About what happened. I realize I didn't just make a mistake. I made you feel uncomfortable. And that's something I never wanted to do." Era was silent for a long moment. She didn't speak, but her gaze remained steady, waiting for him to say more. "I wasn't aware of how much weight my words carried," Jason said, his voice a little quieter now. "I thought I was being kind, but I understand now that I was being thoughtless. I didn't understand the significance of a simple compliment in your culture. I thought I could just say what I felt, but it wasn't my place." Era's eyes softened, and she stepped closer to him. "Jason, you did not harm me. But I needed to tell you that my world, my culture, it is different. It isn't something that can be grasped quickly. Compliments, kindness, they are not the same here. They are deep, and they come with responsibility." Jason nodded, understanding the depth of her words. "I see that now. I really do. And I'm sorry for not taking the time to understand you, your people, before speaking. I should have respected your culture more." There was a quiet moment between them. Jason wasn't sure what would come next. Era had always been reserved, and this apology felt like a step into unknown territory. But he had to say it. He needed her to know that he didn't take their relationship lightly, that he respected her and her values. Era looked at him for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then, slowly, she spoke. "Apology accepted, Jason," she said, her voice gentle, almost hesitant. "It takes strength to admit when you are wrong, and it shows that you are trying to understand. That is what matters." Jason let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He hadn't expected things to be fixed overnight, but hearing Era's words made him feel like they had taken a step forward. "Thank you," he said, his voice sincere. "I'll keep learning. I want to respect you, Era. I really do." Era nodded, a small but genuine smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "You will. It takes time, but I believe you can understand. Just remember, Jason, respect is the foundation. With that, anything is possible." The air between them felt different now, lighter somehow. They weren't perfect, and their understanding of each other wasn't complete, but Jason could feel a new connection forming, a bond built on honesty, patience, and a shared desire to learn. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, he felt that he and Era were on the same path, walking it together. The days that followed Jason's heartfelt apology marked a turning point in his relationship with Era. While their conversations had always been professional, there was a subtle shift in the air now. It was as if the barrier between them had finally cracked, and they were both taking cautious steps towards something more meaningful. They still met daily, discussing their respective cultures, sharing stories from their worlds. But the weight of their previous misunderstandings seemed to have lightened, replaced by an unspoken understanding. Jason had always believed that words held power, but with Era, he began to realize that actions spoke louder than anything he could say. He saw how much she valued wisdom, strength, and honor, not just in the way she spoke, but in the way she carried herself. Era's world was one of discipline, where everything had its place and purpose. For her, beauty wasn't just a superficial trait. It was something earned, something that spoke to the core of a person's being. Era, in turn, was beginning to understand the human side of things, the way Jason expressed himself so freely, his willingness to share emotions without hesitation. He didn't always have the right words, but he was sincere, and she appreciated that. The warmth in his eyes, the way he genuinely listened, was something she hadn't expected to find in someone from a completely different world. Slowly, she started to see that not all humans were the same. There was more to them than she had first realized. One afternoon, as they sat in a quiet room discussing the potential for interspecies cooperation, Jason noticed a slight change in Era's demeanor. She was still calm and composed, but there was a softness to her eyes that hadn't been there before. For the first time, he realized that she was no longer just a diplomat from another planet to him. She was someone he genuinely cared about, someone whose thoughts and feelings mattered deeply to him. "Era," Jason began, his voice soft but sincere, "I've been thinking a lot about everything we talked about. And I want you to know, I respect you, not just because of your position or your people, but because of who you are. I think I'm beginning to understand what you mean when you talk about strength and wisdom." Era looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. She had always been careful with her words, choosing them as though they were precious. But there was something in Jason's voice that made her pause. His honesty was something she had come to admire. "Strength and wisdom are important," she replied, her voice steady. "But they are not the only things that matter. Kindness and patience also hold value. It is difficult for me to understand those things in the way you do, but I am learning. You have shown me that." Jason smiled softly, feeling the bond between them growing. "I'm glad. I think we're both learning from each other." There was a quiet pause as they both sat back, reflecting on the journey they had taken together so far. Jason felt a sense of peace settle within him. The awkwardness, the misunderstandings, they were all part of the process. And now, as he sat here with Era, he could feel that something deeper had begun to grow between them. It wasn't just about diplomacy anymore. It was about mutual respect, about two people from different worlds trying to understand one another. Era, too, felt something shift. There was still much about Jason's world that she didn't understand, but she was beginning to realize that this was a connection she had never expected to form. She had been so focused on the rules of her society, the boundaries that had always defined her life. But now, she was beginning to see that there was more to life than just following those rules. There was the possibility of understanding, of change. As the conversation came to an end, Jason looked at Era, a quiet understanding passing between them. The road ahead wasn't clear, and there would still be challenges, but for the first time, he felt that they were walking it together, not as a human and an alien, but as two individuals, learning from each other, growing together. And that, he realized, was something worth holding on to. The days turned into weeks, and as time passed, Jason and Era continued to work together on their diplomatic mission. They were becoming more comfortable with each other, and the awkwardness that had once lingered between them was now a distant memory. They could talk freely about their worlds, their cultures, and their values. There was still a lot they didn't fully understand, but they were learning, and that was enough for now. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Jason and Era found themselves walking along the peaceful gardens of the embassy. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow across the sky, and the soft hum of alien wildlife filled the air. It was a moment of quiet, a moment of peace. Era walked beside Jason, her thoughts distant, but her presence calming. She had grown accustomed to his company, and although she had always kept her emotions tightly controlled, she found herself feeling something different when she was around him. Something she hadn't expected. "Jason," Era said suddenly, her voice soft and almost hesitant. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you." Jason turned to her, noticing the slight change in her tone. For the first time in a long while, there was a vulnerability in her voice that caught his attention. He stopped walking and looked at her, his curiosity piqued. "What is it?" Jason asked gently. He could see that she was holding something back, something important. Era hesitated, her eyes looking down at the ground for a moment, as though gathering her thoughts. When she looked up again, her gaze met his, and for the first time, there was a quiet openness in her eyes that Jason hadn't seen before. I've been thinking a lot," she began, her voice steady but tinged with emotion, "about everything we've talked about what you said to me the day we met. Your compliment. I didn't understand it at first, but now, I think I do." Jason's brow furrowed in confusion. "You mean when I said you looked beautiful?" Era nodded slowly. "Yes. At the time, I didn't understand why you would say such a thing. It was strange to me. But now, I realize that you didn't just say it to be polite. You meant it. And I've been thinking about that, about why your words affected me so much." Jason was silent for a moment, unsure of where this conversation was headed. Era had always been so composed, so strong. To hear her speak so openly about her feelings was unexpected, and yet it was also comforting. "I've spent my life focusing on what is expected of me," Era continued, her voice soft, "on what is proper in my culture, in my position. But your kindness, your sincerity, it made me question everything I've been taught. I didn't know how to handle it." Jason felt his heart race, realizing that Era was saying something he hadn't anticipated. She was opening up in a way he hadn't seen before, sharing something personal, something deeper. "I didn't mean to make you question your beliefs," Jason said, his voice low and sincere. "I just wanted to show you that there's more to life than rules and expectations, that sometimes kindness and honesty are just as important." Era smiled, a small, genuine smile that lit up her face. "And I see that now. I've learned a lot from you, Jason. more than I ever thought I would. Jason felt a sense of warmth spread through him, a feeling he hadn't expected to experience on this mission. He had come to Zarnia with a sense of duty, but now it felt like something more was developing between him and Era, something real, something that transcended their differences. "I've learned a lot from you, too," Jason said, his voice steady. "About strength, about wisdom, about patience." They stood in silence for a moment, the peaceful sounds of the garden surrounding them. Jason realized that despite all the misunderstandings, despite the cultural differences, they had found something meaningful in each other. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't always easy, but it was real. Era's eyes softened as she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. I think I'm starting to understand you, Jason, in ways I didn't think possible." Jason smiled, feeling a connection grow between them. Something that went beyond words, beyond compliments. It was something deeper, something that had begun to take root and was growing stronger with each passing day. "I'm glad," Jason replied softly. "I'm really glad." And in that moment, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jason knew that no matter where their paths took them, they had started something that could never be erased, an unexpected bond, built on understanding, patience, and the willingness to learn from each other. Jason and Era's growing connection was put to the test sooner than either of them expected. The diplomatic mission they had been working on was nearing its final stages, and tensions between their two worlds were rising. There were still differences, of course, but they had made significant progress. It seemed like the mission was going to be a success until an unexpected crisis threatened everything they had worked for. It started with a message, a sudden and urgent communication from the Zarnian leadership. A group of human diplomats had been attacked by a faction of rogue Zarnian rebels. The news sent a shock through Jason. He had spent weeks trying to build trust between their two species, and now, just when things seemed to be going well, everything was falling apart. Jason immediately turned to Era for guidance. As one of the highest-ranking officials, she was his best source of knowledge on Zarnian politics. Her calm and composed demeanor had always been a source of strength for him. But now, even she seemed shaken by the news. "I don't understand," Jason said, pacing around the room. "Why would they attack us now? We've been so close to reaching an agreement. This makes no sense." Era stood still, her arms crossed, her eyes narrowed in thought. "It's not entirely unexpected. There are always factions within our society that resist change, that refuse to see the benefits of cooperation with humanity." Jason stopped pacing and looked at her. "So, what do we do now? Do we wait for them to strike again?" Era shook her head. "No, I will not let our mission be derailed by these rebels. We need to act quickly before they do more damage. But there is something you must understand, Jason. In situations like this, trust is everything. If we're going to make it through this, we'll need to rely on each other completely." Jason's heart raced. Trust. He had always trusted Era, but this was different. The stakes were higher than they had ever been. Era's calmness, her ability to think ahead, was something Jason had admired. But now he felt unsure. The situation was far more dangerous than he had anticipated. It wasn't just about diplomacy anymore. It was about survival, and he had to trust Era more than ever before. "Do you trust me?" Era's voice broke through his thoughts. Jason looked at her, her gaze steady. There was no hesitation in her eyes. She was asking for something far more than just his professional loyalty. She was asking for personal trust, the kind that could determine their future. Jason took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "I trust you," he said firmly, looking into her eyes. "I've trusted you from the start, but I need to know that you trust me too. We can't do this alone." Era's expression softened, the usual sternness in her face replaced by a quiet sincerity. "I do trust you, Jason. And together, we will find a way through this." The tension between them shifted. They were no longer just two diplomats from different worlds trying to make peace. They were partners now, facing a challenge that neither of them could handle alone. With their trust in each other, Jason and Era quickly put together a plan to address the crisis. They would have to confront the rebels head-on, and it wouldn't be easy. But with their combined knowledge, their growing bond, and their willingness to stand by each other, Jason knew they could succeed. As the evening drew near, Jason and Era made their way to the command center. They were no longer just working for their species, they were fighting for each other and for the future of their worlds. Whatever came next, they were in it together. In that moment, Jason realized that the true test of trust wasn't just in the big decisions or the grand gestures. It was in the quiet moments when you looked into someone's eyes and knew that, no matter what, you would face the challenges ahead side by side. The storm had passed. What had started as a diplomatic mission to unite two very different species had turned into something much bigger. The attack from the rogue rebels had tested everything Jason and Era had built together: trust, courage, and determination. But now, as they stood together, side by side, they could finally see the fruit of their efforts. Jason and Era had worked tirelessly, combining their strengths to deal with the rebellion. Jason had used his knowledge of human negotiation and strategy, while Era had applied her deep understanding of Zarnian politics and military tactics. Their combined efforts had brought a swift end to the chaos, and the rebels were quickly neutralized. The Zarnian leadership, impressed by their cooperation and quick thinking, had agreed to move forward with the peace agreement. As the sun set over the Zarnian city, the sky a soft purple hue, Jason and Era stood together on the balcony of the embassy, looking out at the horizon. The weight of the past days was heavy, but there was a new sense of calm in the air. They had faced adversity and come out stronger for it. And, in a way, they had both changed. Jason turned to Era, the woman who had once been a mystery to him, but now felt like a partner in every sense of the word. "We did it," he said softly, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "We actually did it." Era smiled back, her eyes warm as she looked at him. "Yes, we did. And it wasn't just because of our strategies or our knowledge. It was because we learned to trust each other." Jason nodded, feeling a sense of pride swelling inside him. He had trusted Era completely, and she had trusted him in return. It wasn't just about diplomacy anymore. It was about understanding one another, about working together even when the stakes were high. The bond between them had deepened in ways neither of them had expected, and Jason knew that it was something that would last far beyond this mission. "I never thought I'd be standing here, in this moment," Jason admitted, his voice quiet. "When I first met you, I had no idea what to expect. But I've learned so much from you, Era. You've taught me about strength, about patience, and about what it really means to trust someone." Era's expression softened, and for the first time, Jason saw a vulnerability in her eyes that he hadn't noticed before. "And you've taught me about kindness, Jason, about being open to new ideas, and about not being afraid to show emotions." Jason felt a warmth spread through him at her words. He had always believed that there was more to life than rules and expectations, but now, standing here with Era, he realized how true that really was. They had built something together, something stronger than either of them could have imagined when they first met. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was real. As the last light of the sun disappeared behind the horizon, Jason turned to Era, his heart full of hope. "What happens next?" Era looked at him, her gaze steady and sure. "Next, we keep moving forward, together." In that moment, Jason realized that this wasn't just the end of their mission. It was the beginning of something even bigger. A new chapter, not just for their worlds, but for the two of them. They had overcome their differences, faced challenges that seemed impossible, and come out stronger for it. Together, they had proven that even the greatest divides could be crossed with trust and understanding. And as they stood there, side by side, the future felt full of possibility. Whatever lay ahead, they knew they would face it together, with trust, with respect, and with the knowledge that, no matter how different their worlds were, they had built a bond that nothing could break.